So first and foremost, welcome to today. We're excited about this. This is a little bit different format for us, not just straight up presentations. This is really more about having a conversation with two guys that are experts in the field. And today we're going to be talking about something that doesn't really get a lot of attention in your business, and that is the area of purchasing. And what we really want to touch on today is why that role is so important, and why accurate purchase orders can make or break your planning stack. Many of you have invested heavily in your ERP, your MRPs, your APSs. You probably paid a lot of services to get them dialed just right. But really, one of the biggest issues with that going well for you is purchasing and supplier data and dates. And we're going to dive into that today. So we're super excited about that. My name is Clint McCree. I am co-founder of SourceDay. Been with SourceDay obviously from the very beginning, but prior to that, I ran a manufacturing company. So very familiar with all things manufacturing, and I was a Sightline customer during that time. Joining me today is Joey Himes with SolutionsX, as well as Darren Zyklahady from SourceDay. So we're going to be pouring into topics of ERP, MRP, APS, planning, etc. So real excited to get started in here. And again, if you have any questions, throw those down in the Q&A and we'll get to that. All right, guys, you guys ready to dive into this? All right. So finance, sales, production, and warehouse planning. I mean, most of these for a lot of companies have been modernized, or they're on the docket to get modernized. But for most companies, purchasing teams are still running sort of archaic systems, email, outlooks, spreadsheets, Post-it notes. I started SourceDay because our company was running using Post-it notes to manage purchasing. So Joey, I'm going to go to you. So let's kick this thing off. You're with SolutionsX, and you guys do transformations, ERP transformations for companies. Where does purchasing fit in a bigger ERP transformation for customers?
Oh, that's such a good question to kick things off, Clint, because when I think about purchasing, I have the privilege of sitting in sales cycles as manufacturing companies are walking through that process of evaluating potential software solutions and talking about the pain points and the struggles that they're dealing with. And I definitely hear people talking about, long lead time parts and some of those challenges that, the perennial things that we hear. But the thing that's really interesting to me is that I often see purchasing connected right to inventory control. Like they're almost one and the same in many of the conversations, which we all know they're two very different things. So purchasing kind of gets diminished in the conversation. We have dedicated sections about production control and about quality and about planning or scheduling, and we have conversations about AP and AR and fixed assets, and so there's a lot of things that are happening in these other parts of the business, but purchasing sometimes just kind of gets lumped in with warehousing, with inventory control, with shipping. So I would agree that this is oftentimes one of those forgotten parts of the process, but it's a critical component, as I think we're going to unpack as we go further in the conversation. So I don't want to jump too far ahead there, but
yeah,
I definitely see it being something that isn't front of mind in most of the conversations we're having with customers these days.
Yeah, don't jump ahead, don't steal our thunder. Yeah, like it's like the rest of the organization is like, here's all your great new, widgets and tools and everything that you need to be better at. And in purchasing, by the way, that email that you've been using for 30 years, yeah, you're still going to use the same email. So good luck. Hope things go well for you. All right, Darren, let's get you into the conversation. Like, what does a buyer's day actually look like when PO collaboration is runs through email? It's like, curious to give the audience first some perspective on that. I'm sure we have some buyers out there, but walk us through that.
Yeah, and similar to Joey, I'm talking to buyers, purchasing folks, every day, multiple people throughout the day. And as the technology stack is evolving, there's advanced capabilities, and you're sometimes upgrading an ERP or making a digital transformation. Purchasing, as Joey mentioned, is that forgotten function, and a lot of times it's like, well, we will automate an email to a supplier for the buyer. So, they click a button, it gets approved, it goes, and that's digital transformation is what the buyer gets. But it's still a completely disconnected process after that. And then sometimes it's like, well, IT has given us an open order report that has red light, green lights, yellow lights to show what, what's late, what's not. And that's what we use in a spreadsheet. Every morning we're looking at our open order report. So it's a little bit, not focused on what kind of tools and the importance of those tools for purchasing. So it is primarily email spreadsheet based. And, Clint, you make the joke all the time that in the world of digitization and digital threads and connections, you can use Venmo for a $2 transaction and see it completely the entire way through, yet you're cutting hundreds of millions of dollars of purchase orders every year that go out over email into the unknown. So definitely it is, I would say a lot of times it is that forgotten function.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like early days of SourceDay, we used to call it the black hole, right? You cut your purchase orders in your ERP, and you think everything is right in the world, but reality is there's so many things that could go wrong with that purchase order, and it just goes into the black hole. Sometimes you don't get it back. Awesome.
That's
Well, that's
exactly
good. Yeah.
how I describe my inbox, Clint. It's a black hole.
Exactly.
Things get lost in there, and all of a sudden they come out the other side. And, 3 weeks later, I'm like, where'd this come from? Oh, I remember seeing that once. That's a terrible place to run your purchasing processes through, because it is a black hole.
Yeah, and the mistake that I think a lot of people make is they think the ERPs, I mean, they're using email, but they think that their ERPs are going to take care of everything for them. But once that PO leaves the ERP and goes into that black hole of email, then your ERP can only go so far. So something has to get back to the ERP with an update, something. So we're going to unpack that more as we go. But this is a good starting point here. So a PO is a snapshot of the plan. So everybody knows, like, your MRP, your APS, we're creating plans. The system is generating requirements to go purchase things, but it's not a guarantee of supplier deliver dates. This is sort of already what we're touching on here. You might have a plan, but it's not a guarantee from a supplier side. So Darren, I'm going to go to you on this question. So it's mostly like one of the metrics that SourceDay tracks is purchase order change. And we see that over 50% of purchase orders that get issued change in the life cycle of that PO. So like, walk us through that. So what's most likely changing on purchase orders, and talk a little about why that happens so often and what the impact is.
Well, if I go back to the last statement that I talked about, where POs are leaving the ERP in an email and then managed in spreadsheets, and then eventually, if they can, they're getting updated manually back in the ERP. It's really hard to track change when it's a manual process, because at the end of the day, every change is going to be reflected as the buyer's making the change. So you really don't have a good sense for, is the supplier making the change? Is the supplier price wrong? Is the supplier date what's changing? Is the lead time wrong? The other side of it is, a lot of times if the change doesn't get back in the ERP, it doesn't get caught until later. Like if the price is wrong, sometimes AP deals with the change after the fact. So change is hard to track and analyze if it's not digital. So that's, where you mentioned, Clint, if we digitize the process, we can actually see insights. I will say, when we talk to customers, they're going to say all of the above. Price has been a big one in the past year with everything that's been going on, from a geopolitical standpoint, from prices and tariffs. Dates always are consistently changing, but I don't think they're as volatile as they were during COVID. Lead times are getting a little more ironed out. What's interesting, though, is everybody will be like, yeah, our supplier has a lot of changes. The fact that SourceDay is, looking at the digital connection with the suppliers, what we actually see is a lot of it is the buyers that make the change or ask for the change of an expedite or a defer, or maybe, expedite of a partial shipment faster. So I'm going to say it is all of the above, but most likely, if I'd put my, thumb on it, it'd probably be dates are being either deferred or expedited by buyers or suppliers. And then there is a big element of price change.
Just seems like dates are always the killer. If anybody's implemented or used an ERP, it's dates, right? Everything's dates, and purchase orders are no different. Joey, I want to ask you something. So when you look at MRP and APS, I mean, these are planning systems. I'm not telling people something they don't already know here. but data in, good data out, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at purchase orders, like something like a purchase order, maybe that's not acknowledged by a supplier, like the MRP and APS, they're making these assumptions, right? So like what's the impact here when we have this assumption based system that we don't actually have that real data?
Yeah, that's dates. There's a reason that in the manufacturing world, everybody talks about dates because the dates control everything. If the dates aren't set right, the entire system is going to struggle. So when a date goes in the system, the technology is going to look at that and say, yeah, MRP planning says it is the date. It's not gray, it's not ambiguous. So it's going to treat that as gospel. And so, if you've got a bad date in there, you say my lead time's 3 months and it's actually 3 weeks. Well, now all of a sudden the system's going to turn around and tell me that I can't produce this part. I can't fulfill this order because I'm waiting on a long lead time part. And likewise, if you've got past due POs, I mean, that's probably where I think it shows up more than any other place, because when orders past due, the system's going to interpret that and say, well, that date's in the past. I know we're not going to get in a time machine. We're not going to go back in time and go receive that purchase order yesterday or last week.
That's right.
Instead, It's going to say it's coming in now. Everything before now is now right this moment. And so the system's going to kick out and say, yeah, you can build this today. You can ship that order later this afternoon because everything that's past due is coming in right now. And so if you're not getting those acknowledgments, you're not getting those due dates updated and maintained in the system, bad data in, bad data out. Your plan, your schedule, they're just not reliable. And that's something we hear all the time. I can't trust the system. I don't trust the data I'm looking at. And it's often because bad inputs result in bad outputs. And so you've got to manage those dates. Those dates are the gold standard of truth in everything around planning and scheduling.
Yeah, so much to like unpack. I wish we could have a little more time to unpack that. But so the assumption is the system assumes that if it didn't show up yesterday and it was due yesterday, that you're going to get it today and you're going to be able to build it and do what you need to do today, even though the system has no idea that the supplier never saw it. And one of the things that used to impact me and when I was running a factory is with these purchase order acknowledgments, if you're not on top of those things, and it's a very manual process for most people to manage purchase something as simple as an acknowledgement. But if you're not on top of those things and then you're not careful, you're expecting those parts to come in on a certain date. And a lot of times we don't even find out it's late, maybe for a couple of weeks. But then now that we figure out that it is late and we message it to the supplier, it's too late. The supplier will put you back into their lead time window. If we used to have long lead times, like 52 weeks and things like that. And what you think is going to come in and you're ready to produce something, now you're waiting at the tail end of that. So the system, these are great, powerful systems, but they do make assumptions and they do not have any visibility into what's going on with suppliers unless you feed them that information. So bottom line here, I mean, everything, purchase orders are going to change, right? So POs are going to change all the time. And it's not a matter of, can we slow the change down? I mean, yes, there's some things you can do, but your purchase orders will change. It's what you do with it when you know they're going to change, and actioning that back into the ERP is what's real critical here. Darren, you want to say anything there? I felt like you wanted to hop in on that, or should I just keep going here?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. So one missed update, right? So one when you think about all the thousands of transactions and things that are happening in your world, it only takes one small thing. We used to always talk about a 5-cent part holding up an entire, production line. So when you think about it from that perspective, talk about the impact of that one small update or that missed update from the buyer's inbox all the way to the customer delivery. So we're going to walk through that here a little bit. So Joey, walk us through what happens on the floor when a critical part doesn't show up and when the system says it will. So you talked a little bit about that, but talk about it more in depth in terms of like production misses and scheduling misses and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the best way to describe that is just to give you a real world example. So back when I was working in industry and helping a production floor to get product out the back door. There was this pattern that we started to notice where bad data from the purchasing department, it's showing up. We've got dates that are incorrect, and as we were just discussing, and so then production assumes that those parts are coming in. MRP spits out a plan that says this is what we're going to work on today. And so they cut the order, they start the process, and okay, those parts are going to come in and they should be here in time for that next operation that's going to start in a couple of days. They get part way down the production process, and lo and behold, that part didn't show up. We knew it wasn't going to come in, at least somebody did. Whether it was the supplier who never even knew they were supposed to fill their order, or it was the buyer who got the acknowledgement that it was going to be late and didn't update the information. And so now all of a sudden we're stuck with a shortage, and that production process has to halt. And, real world story, when I was in industry, what happens then? Well, we put it on a cart, we wheel it over to this corner of the shop, and it sits there. And there's a bunch of parts that have been pulled, put into WIP for the next step, because they were getting ready to go, but they were one part short. So they flag that cart. They say, I'm waiting on this part. It should be on this purchase order. Great. It wheels over there and it sits and waits, which is lost time, lost productivity, probably a missed customer expectation as well. But then it got worse because that pattern continued, and the next part comes through. They've got another job and it's also got a shortage. Well, I know that I've got this graveyard of extra parts sitting over here. So I'll just walk over there and I'll look under the shelf, and oh, look, there's the part I'm missing. I'll pull that one out. I'll go complete the job that I'm working on, because I've still got to, from the production side, we've still got throughput requirements. We've still got to get stuff done. I got people just sitting around idle. Might as well get something done. So I go and steal that part so I can keep this job working. Everything's great and wonderful. That one maybe gets out the door and we get product shipped today. Woohoo! Except now when that part that was the original shortage on that order that's sitting over there in the graveyard shows up, they pull it back in, they put it on the production line, and guess what? There's a different shortage because we robbed Peter to pay Paul.
A new part's missing. Yeah,
a new part's missing. So, there's this ripple effect that it runs all the way through your shop, and sometimes you don't even realize it's happening at that level. But at the end of the day, it just boils down to customer expectations aren't being met. Your on-time delivery scores are dropping, because you're trying to manage all of this, and that's the ripple effect of just one bad PO, because it compounds when it moves on to the next order and the next order and the next order, when you're just trying to do your best to get product out the door.
Yeah, you probably should have been my ERP consultant. So see if this lands with you. When I was running a factory, whenever we would have part issues, but we still felt like we needed to get something, delivered to the customer, and we didn't want to stop things, we would build something knowing that we were short on material and put it over to the side. So when that part came in, all we had to do was put the part on there and we could ship it out the door. But just like you said, we would do that, but then that particular job order was tying up material that could be used somewhere else. And so people on the floor knew that they would go rob parts off those deals. But the worst thing for us is, besides that now the assembly is completely taken apart, is we weren't making those transactions in the system. We were completely blind to that. Like, have you heard? Is that happen? I mean, I'm sure it happens a lot, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, if I'm going to walk over there and pull a part that's technically in WIP, it's sitting over there on another job order, I'm not going to tell the system I did that. There's not going to be a transaction recorded. And, it's not just the throughput and the on-time delivery stuff that you run into then. Now, all of a sudden, you're starting to talk about costing problems. Because if I'm expediting that part to get it in, well, and then I'm stealing from one to the other, if I'm doing actual costing, I got no idea what's going on, because everything's messed up. No, I'm not tracking any of that information, because at the end of the day, manufacturing people out on the shop floor, their job is to get product out the door. They got to make stuff. They got to ship stuff. And so they're not going to worry too much about all of those extra transactions. We'll get that caught up later. So yeah, you're oftentimes blind to the fact that this is even happening if you're sitting in the office.
Right. You are, right. And the system, of course, is completely blind. So, again, what we're trying to really, talk about here for the audience is showing that connective tissue between a purchase order, a part, a single purchase order line and how it can have a ripple effect throughout the entire organization. So, Darren, I'm going to go to you on this one because we just talked about the impact to production. And one of the things that I ask customers all the time is, do you have supplier issues? And typically the answer is yes. The next question is, do your supplier issues ever impact your customers? And the answer is typically yes. Then I say, well, do you measure that? Do you know how big of a problem that is? And the answer is typically no. Which is really interesting because we know that is a very important thing to measure. So Darren, let's take it one more step further. Like, what's the impact to customers and customer service with purchase orders?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Clint, because some people will say, nope, we're great at firefighting and we will get everything out the door and we have 99.9% customer on time delivery. Because again, you don't really want to say like, oh, we are messing up in purchasing or we're messing up here. Because as Joey mentioned, like when he talks about the parts and robbing the parts from one bin to the next bin or job to the job, we're not even accounting for other things outside of the PO date issue purchasing thing that we're talking about. There's still staffing issues. There's things at the actual shop floor that are breaking down. So there's a lot of things outside of that also that you're dealing with. The interesting thing, I talked to a lot of different manufacturers, and I think some of it, if you're engineered to order, your customer service problem, customer on time delivery problem, different than if you're make the stock, because sometimes purchasing might just dial up the inventory levels that they house for the suppliers that aren't super good at delivering to protect themselves. Again, when I mentioned we're good at firefighting, it's not like they're doing something wrong. They just know we don't want that to be stocked out, so we're going to have a little bit more and inflate that inventory. An example, like I think you were mentioning, Joey, just like in an engineering engineer to order type of world, project based manufacturing, we'll see some customers shift things around on the floor. I had one particular customer that they're in the data center, industry, and they would have to have commitments to deliver their, the engineered, order to their customer on time as part of the rollout or the build of the, the data center. What they would do though, again, Clint, a lot of times the penny part, they had small parts that they would not get on time. They would send an incomplete, part project to the data center, get the part, drop ship it, send services people there to go, finish it on site. So there's cost and all these things. Again, they delivered on time. So I think when you look at it, there's ways that people, I don't necessarily, they move the measurement scale of on time to their customers, but there's definitely issues. And the issue might be hidden inside of inventory. It might be hidden in just like warehousing extra space for, inventory. But some people do, it is a problem and they're losing customers or they have late penalties, just reputation sometimes. But each customer is a little bit different that I talk to based on what they make, how they make it. But they always want to deliver on time and full to their customers and be the best they can in the industry.
You know what you gave me a sense of, and we talk about this all the time. Everybody is going to do what it takes to make the customer happy. But everything that you just described is like what we call heroing. I mean, you're doing diving saves and trying to do everything you can to take care of the customers. You don't want to have an unhappy customer. All that is very costly. All that is a drain on resources. And, if you live in that world and you're constantly in that world, it can burn out your teams. And those are the kind of things you certainly don't want to do.
Yeah, Clint, I want to just make one more comment there too. Is, the theme of what we're talking about is that date, right? That purchase order data that causes this. Sometimes you can't help if your staff gets sick or somebody breaks a leg and they can't come in and you can't backfill. We're talking about things you can control that right now they're out of control because you're disconnected from your supplier of that communication. So again, let's course correct the things we can. Some things you're never going to be able to control, and let's let those be where you do the heroing.
Yeah. When you and I, when the three of us were prepping for this, I think both of you said sort of the same thing. And I think it really hit home with me. I think it's worth saying again is that A purchasing problem is not a one person's problem. A purchasing problem becomes everyone's problem if we don't get those materials indoors. So well said, guys. Let's talk about sort of the elephant in the room when we look at, this is not just a purchasing thing, but let's talk about the elephant in the room of data and system trust. So one of the things that I want to discuss with you guys, and Joey, want to go to you on this, is what happens to buyers and suppliers when they stop trusting the system and start overriding it, even leaving the system, managing stuff outside the system? Like, what starts happening there?
Oh my goodness. If you can imagine it, it's on the list of things that are going to just go crazy when we start distrusting the data, when we start working around the system. We talked earlier about that idea of, hey, I'm going through, I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, pulling parts just to make sure I'm getting stuff out the door, trying to make sure the customer's happy. Well, all of those transactions aren't happening, which is part of what leads to the distrust of the system, because now my inventory is off. Now I'm because I've already issued the material to this job, but I never pulled it off that job. Then I turn around and I issue it to a different job so I can get that one moving forward. And so my inventory numbers are getting messed up. And now all of a sudden, when the buyer looks at their workbench and they say, hey, these are the things I need to buy today, they look at it and go, I don't need to buy that much, because I know I just cut that order and I know how much demand we've actually had. And so they're looking at the system and they're saying, okay, I don't trust that. And in that case, maybe they're right, because they've got the order coming in and we didn't get all those transactions right. But then when they start to do that a couple times and they're right, now they start to question the places where they should be trusting the system. And now we're creating new shortages. We're creating new supply chain issues because we don't trust the system. We start moving things out to Excel documents, and we start putting all of these worksheets together, and we've got all of these complex VLOOKUPs and formulas, and guess what? One missed key here, one missed key there, and now all of a sudden the system's giving me completely different details than what I'm getting in my spreadsheet, and I don't even actually know which one's right and which one's wrong. So all of those things start to create all of these additional inefficiencies. And I think one of the things that oftentimes gets overlooked in this question about bad data is forget the strife of the data problems that it creates. It's the internal strife between people. Because, well, it's the buyer's fault. No, it's production's fault. No, it's the warehouse's fault. We start pointing fingers. We start creating all of this angst between different groups. We're all trying to work towards the same goal. And at the end of the day, the problem is actually bad data. If we had good data, if we took the time to clean that up and get a good starting point, well, all of a sudden we don't have to point fingers at each other. And when that fight's raging, we all get on board and we say we need to solve this. But more often than not, it simmers right below the surface. Nobody's really talking about it. Nobody's really pointing the fingers, but everybody's grumbling, and there's an inefficiency hit that comes with that as well. So I think getting all of that data nailed down, it really does have far-reaching implications.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. I mean, I've talked to thousands of customers, and a lot of times you hear their employees and team, they don't trust the system, and it's never an ERP problem ever. I mean, the ERPs are pretty good at this point. It's always a data problem, and the more the data problems are really coming from either the inputs or lack of inputs. If you're just letting the data sort of sit there, like I think of things like old lead times and old, not updating due dates, and just all these things that stay stagnant, end up sort of getting to the point where people don't trust the system. They leave the system. Now they're doing things in spreadsheets, and then it just becomes a compounding problem. So well said there. So Darren, going to you, I'm curious from your perspective, when you're looking at supplier data and it becomes available, when you start looking, when you get away from like these disparate systems and you have more of a structured way of collecting and putting that data, what becomes available in terms of additional information? Like it's, you know where I'm headed with this question. It's like, what else are you getting from it once you start to collect things more systematically? What are the additional benefits of that?
Yeah, well, I think we have the backdrop right here of MRP and APS, and it relies on accurate data. One question that I always ask when I'm in front of a customer is, do you trust MRP? Do you use MRP and APS for change suggestions? And a lot of times it's like, no, but we want to. No, we don't trust it. It's too noisy. We're doing a VLOOKUP table like Joey mentioned. And it's like, wait a minute, you have this high power advanced piece of technology that can do a lot, right? Sometimes there's so many settings in APS that you can do, but if the dates are wrong and everything's wrong, it's like people just throw that out the door and they just keep doing things very tactical and very manual. So as you start to connect and digitize things and get the data, the one thing that I like to say that it's so simple, but if you get things not 100% on time and in full, and a lot of times people get partial shipments, they get expedites, so hey, give me what you can when you can. What happens if you're not making those updates as additional releases or additional lines inside of the ERP, you have a remaining balance, but the remaining balance has no date associated to it. So how can MRP and APS actually have any knowledge of when that's coming in to do planning against it? So it might just say, keep ordering, so there's no knowledge of that. So when you can use connection points between the suppliers and you're getting information from the supplier off of their back order PDF that they send you, and you can automate and split lines for buyers and purchasing automatically, like you've just course corrected part of the MRP APS problem that the distrust is coming from because people have no idea. So one example there, Clint, is just like the split lines, the partial receipts, the ability to get those in an accurate, sequential order. So you know what's coming on, when it's coming, even if it's going to be late, you need to know it's going to be late.
Yeah, well said. I think when I was listening to both of you guys kind of talk through this, when you think about a company can go buy the best planning system in the world. By the way, I'm a CSI customer, satellite customer. I love that solution. It's awesome. You can buy the best warehouse management solution in the world. You can buy the best accounts payable automation solution in the world. But if you do not have good PO data, all that stuff is going to be a problem, and you're going to be chasing bad data all over the place. Well said, guys. So kind of segueing into what I just said is the fix ripping out your planning system? Is closing the gap between ERP and Supplier? Like, how do you handle? So going to you, Darren, back to you real quickly. By the way, we need to give quicker responses here just so we can get through everything. How do you handle this across suppliers of very different sizes and technical capability?
Yeah, well, I'll say that the concept of throwing a vendor portal in the mix and saying, hey, we're going to digitize things, vendor, supplier, come use this, and enter things into my system, doesn't work. It hasn't worked for decades. So I think that the thing here is, if you're going to start to improve MRP APS, digitize the PO process, it's like you have to understand each supplier is different. You can't force fit the supplier into a new technology. You need to take what maybe they give you today out of their ERP in a PDF and, just take that, consume it, digitize the PDF and put that in the system. So you might have a supplier mom and pop shop that enters something in an email, clicks a button in an email, it's still email based. So every supplier is different. It's being able to digitize each one of those different processes for the type of supplier without making them throw a whole new thing into their world. So I think that's the thing, is giving suppliers options. At the end of the day, digitizing each one of those options, whether it's an email, PDF, Excel sheet, maybe it's an API directly to their ERP, whatever the case is, every supplier needs an ability that easily pulls the data, digitizes the data.
Right. It's a tricky thing, right? With suppliers, you gotta, many of you might be small companies with large suppliers, or you might be quite large with small suppliers. And when you're looking at trying to close this gap, you've got to factor in all those variables. Super important. So Joey, one thing I want to ask you about, like, again, we talked at the top of the call, you're an ERP expert. You help customers, modernize their businesses and their outcomes. There's probably customers on here that are looking at an ERP for the first time, or customers that have been running Sightline or other ERPs for a while. Curious from your perspective, why should supplier collaboration, or really thinking about how you're going to solution that, be a part of ERP conversation from day one instead of waiting down the road?
Oh, that's such a good question, Clint. I mean, because we started off talking about the fact that this is oftentimes an afterthought. Most people aren't thinking about, hey, what should I do with my supply chain? What should I do with my buyers? And how do I automate purchasing systems? That's typically not a thought. And if you're in that position where, hey, we've got an ERP, we're satisfied, we've been up and running on Class 3 Industrial Sightline, which I hope you are. I mean, I'm kind of partial, but if that's where you're at, then, and you haven't thought about that, then start now by all means. But to your question, why should we think about that during the evaluation process for the entire ERP solution? Well, first and foremost, that's a major change for your organization internally. There's a lot of things that are moving, and from a change management perspective, you want to minimize some of that change where you can. So I understand why sometimes this might get pushed to a phase 2, but you also have to stop and think about the fact that this is a major change for all of your external stakeholders. We think oftentimes about the impact that a ERP shift is going to have on our customers. We're going to change the look and feel of the invoice, perhaps, or we're going to, it's going to have an impact on how we ship orders and meet that on-time delivery to our customers. But that supplier relationship is just as critical. It's just as important. And going through the process of changing your systems internally to stand up a new ERP and then turn around later and say, oh, we actually want to automate our supplier relationship. Now you've just introduced a second change to that critical component of your success as a business.
Right.
So managing that change early, thinking about how to really level that experience up, because what we find is the best companies, the companies that are the most successful, are the ones that treat every one of their suppliers and customers like a business partner. And when you think about this and say, hey, they really have a stake in the success of our business, because if we're successful, they're successful as a supplier. So how can you improve the experience with them? Because that's ultimately going to drive dollars to you, the bottom line for you. Mm-hmm. It's going to improve your customer satisfaction when you're getting those orders out. So yeah, this should be a day one consideration. We need to make sure that we're leveling up in all of those areas. It's not just engineering. It's not just inventory control. It's not just about automating the AP process. It's think upstream and find ways to really improve that key strategic relationship you have with all of those supplier stakeholders.
Yeah, and I love the word you said, level up. I mean, we've always at SourceDay anyways tried to educate customers on whether you like it or not, your suppliers are a stakeholder in your business. The tricky part is they're disconnected from your business, and all the other stakeholders that you have from your internal team are stakeholders that are connected through an ERP. And so connecting your suppliers to your business because they are stakeholders should be definitely something you should consider, because of all the reasons we've been talking about today. I mean, if you're going to go invest in an ERP and MRP and APS and warehouse management and not think about how you're going to get good supplier data in the system, it's going to be difficult to get the value that you're probably looking for there. So, all right. I know we're getting a little long on here on time. So question for you guys about this. Where should a manufacturer start in evaluating its own PO data accuracy? So I'll let you guys, Darren, you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, I'll make it quick, Clint, and we can open up to some Q&A. I think a lot of it is just looking at current state if you can, on that open order report, what seems to be the issue suppliers. A lot of people will know in purchasing who their issue suppliers are. Maybe it's you look at a quick inventory, report of where you have a lot of inventory. And then I think generally speaking, holistically about the PO process is don't try and go and do every process, from acknowledgement to ASNs with barcoding and shipping labels and, that kind of stuff. Like start with order acknowledgements, getting changes, getting reconfirmations, and then grow into some other capabilities. And then also you can look at, even though every supplier is not created equal and we have different ways to approach suppliers, sometimes you do want to look at, is outside processing the one that's causing the most issue versus, if you're ordering stuff on Amazon, getting it next day, that's not your problem. So you have to put a little analysis behind it, but, don't overcomplicate it. It's a simple thing at the end of the day. Let's look at acknowledgments and changes.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that question as well and say Darren's nailed it there. It's control what you can. I mean, and the first thing you can do is if you know you've got data that's wrong in the system and you have at least a better source to get that information updated, start there first, control what you can, and then take that step back and look at it holistically and say, if I could solve one supplier relationship, if I could improve one process, whether that's my outside processing vendors, as Darren suggested, or maybe it's a key supplier. Hey, I've recognized that I've got these big orders that are being held up by little dinky parts. So maybe you go after the small supplier, the suppliers of the small parts, the cheap stuff that you're buying lots of, instead of going after the big suppliers with the long lead times and the very specialized components. But maybe it's the reverse. Figure out for your business what's the biggest bang for the buck in terms of that improvement in automation.
I love that answer. We touched on that, so appreciate that, guys. I'm going to move into the Q&A section here. Question that came in that I wanted to ask. I'm going to go right back to you. So we touched on it a little bit, but I want you to touch on again since we were asked a question. Where should PO collaboration? So if you're thinking about moving off of like traditional, email, things like that, where should PO collaboration fit into an ERP implementation roadmap?
Oh man, if I get the opportunity to put that into the initial implementation, absolutely you should. I mean, figure out your core base process, but don't get past that that final pilot or the user acceptance testing phase without thinking about this. I mean, that's the best case scenario. Again, because you're going to have the opportunity to really improve that experience with your suppliers and to change things with them once. Because if you're changing software, if you're changing ERPs, your PO is changing. And I know the benefits of SourceDay and the way that you guys approached that problem, and it's a much better experience for your suppliers, but it's a very different experience for the suppliers as well. So change it once, get it in there early, but ultimately start wherever you are. I mean, that's it. Wherever you are in the process, you should start now.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, we know, right? Everybody out there, everybody on this that has joined us is dealing with some level of supplier issues. And we've talked about heroing and diving saves. That's probably what you're doing every day, day in and day out. And there are ways that you can to address that and certainly not have to live in that life anymore. So Darren, we have two more questions. I'm going to go to you on this one, and then we'll have one more, we'll wrap things up. We get asked this question all the time when you talk about looking at solutions outside of email and spreadsheets, more of like a supplier portal or supplier experience, supplier adoption. Everybody worries about that. We got a question about it. How do I know my suppliers would do something like this? Like, touch on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and I think that concept has changed over the course of even since I've been at SourceDay for 5 years. It's changed. It goes back to what I mentioned about is not every supplier is the same. So the supplier needs to have options and optionality to meet them where they need to be or where they want to be. So that still could be a small mom and pop shop. They might want to operate over email, even though we say sending emails aren't great, right? It's not a great way, but the emails you send today are not digitally connected. There's no input back. So can that supplier click a button in an email and then get you a signal back of an acknowledgement or a change? So that's number one. I think number two, Clint, you mentioned the bigger suppliers, they're not going to change their process. So if they're sending you a PDF and a sales order acknowledgement today, let them do that. Let's just pull that PDF and do what we need to digitize it. Other suppliers actually benefit from seeing, a solution with open order dashboards and, do soon tasks. So some suppliers want that. So adoption, if you can give them choices and not change their current state and allow them to operate how they operate today, adoption really becomes a different conversation. And it's now about performance and execution, not really using a tool. Hopefully that helps.
No, I appreciate that. Okay, last question, guys, because we're going to run a little long here. Joey, I'm going to go to you on this, and Darren, I don't know if you want to touch on it, but the question is, how do you build a business case for improving PO collaboration? So one of the, talking to their manager. They want to, get the leadership bought into this and say, hey, I'm tired of diving saves and heroing and all these things. Like, how do we help them, or how do they help themselves to build that business case?
That's tough, because obviously you're going to know your leadership best. So the first question you got to ask yourself is, what's the kind of thing that's going to capture the attention and make it real for your leaders? So sometimes that means that you have to call out those diving saves. Sometimes because you're stepping in and you're saving the day, you're doing those heroic efforts, they think, oh, but that's great. Well, now you have to expose that. So oftentimes when you're in that situation, data is a challenge. I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about all this whole time is bad data. But if you can start to mine that data, extract some information, get some hard numbers. Because what I find is that most executives, they're going to look for, give me some real numbers. I mean, how many purchase orders are we dealing with? How many times are we having to expedite? How many times are we dealing with late deliveries? How many times does the phone ring from the production supervisor saying, where's my parts? How many times are you dealing with having to go in and replace an order because of those things? Or, get some measurements and collect that together and just let the data speak for itself. Because more often than not, I think what you'll find is that this is an area that the decision makers that you're going to be trying to persuade, they're not thinking about. And if you give them the data, give them a chance to process it, that's probably going to get you a long way down that path. And use some of the data that you heard today. Clint, you shared, for example, that the data is very clear. More than 50% of purchase orders change from the time they're cut to the time they're actually closed out and received. Well, if that's true, and I can find a way to automate those changes for half of the work I'm doing, how much more can our purchasing team do? You could spend more time actually researching better suppliers, people with better lead times, better pricing options for you. But you don't have time to do that because you're too busy chasing all of these PO issues with the stuff that's already in flight.
Firefighting, right? Firefighting. Darren, I'm gonna go to you real quick. But one of the things that we can help people with, if they're interested, is we do have an ROI model that they can help sort of understand sort of what data points they need to be looking for to be able to justify it. So I'll let you touch on that. Yeah.
I'd say back to the ripple effect of the PO. When you think about it, in order to look at a business case and justify it, as Joey just mentioned, if you go and look at all the things that PO touches, AP, finance, working capital, inventory levels, customer, late fees, late penalties. If you look at each one of those and dig in a little bit about what the PO is doing and what's happening, you might be like, we're missing early pay discounts because of not being able to pay an invoice because of a price discrepancy that we didn't catch on the order acknowledgement. You might be able to say, we're holding extra inventory for this supplier because we don't trust them. So those are the things that leadership cares about. They don't necessarily care about, sometimes your time, like you're doing your job, that's your job to get POs in and out the door and update ERP. It's those hard cost dollar savings that helps you become part of that digital transformation. And ultimately, purchasing should not be that forgotten function if you understand the impact it has everywhere else that a lot of times people don't look at.
And it would be really surprising for a lot of people as they start to uncover that. Well, look, we are done here. We really appreciate everybody's time today. I want to thank Darren as well as Joey from SolutionsX. If you are new to us, they do ERP implementations for Sightline CSI and Enforce Solution. And of course, Darren is with me here at SourceDay. Thank you for your time today. If you have any more questions, please get those emailed out to SolutionsX, and we'll definitely get on that and get those responses back to you. Appreciate everybody joining us. Hope you enjoyed it.
See you. Thanks. Cheers.
Later.